least for this full year. And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from the Department of the Treasury that all the people should go shopping. This decree was first made when the stock market reached a high of 20,000 shares traded. And the decree was renewed when it hit the 30,000 mark. So, all went out to shop, everyone to his own mall and online shopping portals. And a church-going man also went up from his suburban home to the city with its many stores because he wanted to show he was from the household and lineage of prosperity. And with him was his wife, who was great with economic worry. And so it was that while they were there, the days were accomplished, that the store inventories should be delivered. And they found many expensive items, interactive dolls, trucks that turned into flying drones, an assortment of video games, tablets, and smartphones. And the woman used her debit card for those they could afford and charged the rest on many other different kinds of smartphone apps. So she brought forth her many presents and wrapped them in brightly colored paper and laid them in the garage, for there was no room for them in the closet. And there were in the same area children keeping watch over their stockings by night. And lo, Santa from the north came upon them, and the glory of their neighbors' gaudy outdoor lights shone all around them. But they were sore afraid, since they had seen the darker versions of the Santa movies. Then standing at the front door, Santa said unto them, "Fear not, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people who can afford this holiday. For unto you shall be given this day in your suburban home great feasts of much food, sweet desserts, and many presents. And this shall be a sign unto you. You will find the presents, power chargers not included, wrapped in bright paper and lying under a plastic tree, adorned with tinsel, ornaments, and programmable lights." And suddenly there was with Santa Claus a multitude of relatives and friends praising one another, saying, "Glory to you for getting me this gift. I've always wanted it." But most of them were lying. So it came to pass, as Santa, friends, and relatives were gone away, each to their own home, that the parents looked at one another and said, "I'm sure glad that's over. I am too tired to clean it up now. Let's go to bed and pick it up in the morning." And when they had said this, they remembered the statement that had been spoken by the holiday vendors. Christmas comes only once a year. And they wondered at those things that were sold to them by the Christmas help. But the children treasured their favorite gifts in their hearts, hoarding the best from each other so no one else could use them, while mocking the gifts they rejected. And the parents turned out the lights and went to bed, glorifying and praising one another for all the bargains they had heard and seen, which were just as had been told to them by the retailers. Last week we completed working through the book of Ephesians. That study was fairly deep and rich in theology. And that depth of learning is important for us. We don't shy away from it. And yet, with the holidays in full swing, it will be good to look at something else for a while, since our minds are already on different aspects of the season, like shopping and online deals, baking, cooking, the preparations for various events, along with trying to schedule dinners and get-togethers with friends and coworkers and family. And while our focus today will not be on Christmas exactly, it will be on a subject very closely related to this time of year: wealth. As you study the Old Testament book of Proverbs, you will find many different areas of life that are being addressed. And yet, to absorb and apply the volume of wisdom contained in this book, I've discovered it's helpful to break it down to be studied one topic at a time. The actual words finances or valuables may be hard to locate, but other words like treasure or wealth show up about 19 times. And to gain an even broader understanding of how money and wisdom work together, it will require a study of a couple other words as well: rich and poor. Now, when you hear these two terms, it's difficult not to have certain pictures come into your mind. It's very tempting to be more fixed in our views concerning money, how it's obtained, how it's used, how it's shared, how much is enough, along with what defines poverty or what determines being rich. We live in a time when we are being taught or brainwashed into making discussions about wealth or poverty to be either or, good or bad. But it's not that simple. Of course, God does give us some clear guidelines concerning this subject, which must not be crossed if you want to do right and live by His standards as we manage His resources. At the same time, believers can end up blurring the distinction between the Old Testament and New Testament discussions of treasure if we're not paying attention to each context where the issue is discussed. So, first let's look at some of the things associated with this topic. Very few are actually content with the wealth they have in their possessions. And it seems that even if you are satisfied, something major happens, which forces you to reconsider if there's really enough money to handle the emergency. And then in those times when you need something but don't have the resources, it's very common to borrow. Have you ever heard of co-signing a loan? This is what this particular proverb is about. Be not one of those who strikes hands in a pledge, who puts up security for debts. If you have nothing with which to pay, why should your bed be taken from under you? Borrowing itself is not a problem. Charging excessive interest, taking advantage of those who are in need, or borrowing when you cannot truly pay it back. Those are all moral issues addressed by God, but for another day. So taking a loan as a married couple is one thing, since there is a prior commitment to both the marriage and your shared resources. But co-signing for a relative is an inherently risky contract. So is co-signing for a friend or a work partner. My first and last brand new car was purchased in the summer after I graduated college. I had moved to the Tidewater area of Virginia, near Norfolk and Virginia Beach, to take a job in a retail and wholesale business. The husband and wife team that I was working for were the parents of my college girlfriend. So as a sort of preliminary entrance into what might have become my future in-laws, the father offered to sign my new car loan agreement. Since he was providing my wages, I suppose he felt relatively secure that I would pay off the loan in 4 years. But he had no way of knowing that when September hit and his daughter returned to college, that she would have zero interest in me. I was working for her mom, her dad was writing the paychecks, and my girlfriend didn't have the courage to break up with me. Talk about awkward. As the months continued, I could see that this work arrangement, while it was enjoyable, would not last very long if the relationship was over. And a little after Christmas, I knew it was time to move on. So I drove back home to New Jersey with a car only 6 months off the showroom floor, and the father still had his name on my car loan. It was a good thing for him that I did not break my promise to honor that debt, and in 4 years I paid it off in full. But until that happened, the father could not know if I would hurt his credit or uphold it. The assumption in this verse is that the one who is shaking another's hand in an agreement is a person who has the means or the capital to pay back somebody else's loan. Now, if you agree to co-sign a loan with your own wealth as collateral, you are ultimately responsible for paying it off if your co-signer does not. Now, to understand the imagery from verse 27, we need to know this. When Solomon recorded the Proverbs for us around 900 BC, most people slept on the floor with a cloak or an outer garment as their blanket. Beds were a sign of luxury, and only for those people who could afford them. So if you had the money to own a bed in the first place, you may be able to make a loan to somebody else. However, if your cosigner defaults on that loan, when the creditor comes knocking and you don't have the money to pay it in full, you may suddenly find yourself sleeping on the floor without any covering. Here's another one concerning loans. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower becomes the lender's slave. This is not an indictment of those who have the money to lend to others, the rich. Rich does not equal evil, and poor does not equal righteous. Don't believe for a moment what the culture tells you. And yet those with the ability to offer a loan must exercise wisdom in how to use that wealth. And the borrower must exercise wisdom in accepting a loan. Otherwise, the creditor may become a slave master over the debtor. Just because we can make a purchase doesn't mean we ought to. Now, those of us with Credit cards that carry even a small balance know how true this verse is. Of course, we're not literal slaves to the bank, but our freedom to use our own riches is severely limited because someone else has a claim to every paycheck that comes in until that balance is gone. So instead of actual slavery, an indentured servant may be a better imagery for us to understand. An indentured servant is one who becomes a hired hand in order to pay off a debt through hard labor. We all know there are times when we cannot avoid taking a loan from someone or some institution. The natural disasters that have come through our country just this year alone have caused that kind of choice onto thousands of people. And those who have lost much or everything must exercise great discernment because there are vultures out there waiting to offer a great deal which will take advantage of the one who lost so much. Therefore, to study and understand wisdom as it relates to our financial status requires more than simply looking at these terms. How we view, obtain, share, or value wealth is the larger focus of Proverbs. And the rest of the Bible, by the way, when we're looking at the subject of material possessions. The abundance or lack of riches is not an automatic window into God's blessing on someone. And yet our interaction with wealth does, in fact, reveal something significant in our relationship with the Lord. In addition to the words we looked at so far, we must include a study of these terms as well: desire and seek. Desire shows up about 16 times in Proverbs, but 11 of them are warnings against desire or identify those desires that are unhealthy. Seeking or searching shows up even more as a term. And in the book of Proverbs, the things sought after or desired are typically related to acquiring valuables of many varieties. Some good, some not so good. Also, several desires are not about wealth at all, but they're about gaining something else that is considered worthwhile. So here's a proverb that's really about more than the desire for just a good dinner. When you sit down to dine with a ruler, consider carefully what is before you, and put a knife to your throat if you are a man of great appetite. Do not desire his delicacies, for it is deceptive food. Now, at the same time I was beginning to pay off my new car loan, I was invited to the wedding of a couple of college friends. Now, given the awkwardness of my relationship at that point in time, I went by myself. But one of the newlyweds had come from a family who had some significant wealth. I think the father was a doctor. I had never been to such a high-end event before, and I felt very fortunate to be invited in the first place. Before the meal ever started, there were servers walking around all dressed up with shrimp and scallop hors d'oeuvres. Now, having never eaten scallops, I decided to try it. Someone else was paying for it, so if I didn't like it, I had nothing to lose. Well, I did try 1 or 5 or 6, and I could have had my whole meal right there, and that's my favorite seafood to this day. The dinner itself was a formal sit-down with all the flashing, well-decorated, everything, and I was definitely out of place. But having friends like that allowed me to enjoy such the best of what could have been offered. And there was no ulterior agenda in this particular setting. My hosts were simply celebrating the marriage of this couple. So in my case, I was free to eat the best of the best and not worry about any of it. However, dinner invitations from outside your social standing should be approached with caution and discernment. It happens to politicians and business people all the time. Such high-end settings are often created to give the appearance of generosity, as some honored guest is celebrated. But the events may actually be an investment of you as a person who attends, because you will be asked to do something in return for all the food you just consumed. In corporate and political life, such venues are understood to be fundraisers. That's above board. But there are moments where you're led to believe, at least for a moment, that it's all without cost until you're asked to pay up. And in darker situations, one of the courses during that expensive meal might be some private deal or side agenda. So put a knife to your throat is the kind of hyperbole that Jesus used in the New Testament. If it causes you to sin, pluck out your eye or cut off your arm. And this is why such shocking statements are given to us in the Bible. If you're tempted, not by gluttony per se, although that might be there, but by an appetite that is so deep that you will be led into sin in order to satisfy that desire, then take drastic measures to get away from the temptation. For the man with a pornography problem, it requires eliminating all avenues to view it, including no longer having access to those internet sites or the strip clubs. For the one desperate to obtain alcohol or drugs, it means eliminating the substance 100%, not just taking them in moderation. And for the one with a hunger for being noticed or praised by others, it requires turning down the invitation to be in the spotlight before pride takes over. When you sit down to dine with a ruler, consider carefully what is before you and put a knife to your throat if you are a man of great appetite. Do not desire his delicacies, for it is deceptive food. So here's another aspect to these extravagant events. If you are present at the table of someone of social importance in order to gain favor, or rub shoulders with the rich and famous in order to obtain bragging rights, then the appetite is really about elevating your own position through such contact. The imagery is eating, but desiring delicacies applies to more than just good food. It may very well include a greed for more wealth, power, status, or recognition. And all of those desires or appetites come with a price. So let's go a little further in the same chapter, Proverbs 23:4. Do not wear yourself out to get rich. Have the wisdom to show restraint. Cast but a glance at riches, and they are gone, for they will surely sprout wings and fly off the sky like an eagle. Now, casting a glance describes the eyes that fly and dart about. Your focus moves away from where your eyes are currently to the riches you hope to obtain. Now, it reminds me of that dynamic that happens when one person keeps talking without any clue that he's boring the person standing in front of him. And the one who is hoping for the monologue to end starts looking at his watch or at the clock or over the shoulder of the one speaking. The listener is desperately looking for someone to come and rescue him from this one-sided conversation. In this case, the eyes that fly around are not looking for an escape, but they're looking for chasing after easy income. What's in view here is the all-consuming investment of time and energy to gain something more. While everything else, quiet time, family time, ministry time, will appear to take second priority over the chance to make a few more dollars. And whether the desire is actually for more wealth or the things that go along with it, like power and admiration or stuff, the one consumed by such passion often drops prior commitments in order to obtain one of these other treasures. So as soon as a new offer comes up, there's no warning or phone call to those for whom other promises were already made. So the one more scheduled appointment is broken, often disappointing someone the individual claims to love more than wealth. And those same individuals are let down again and again. But the one doing the chasing assumes that the one left hanging will understand once he or she understands the reason. You know, my boss called, it's work. You understand how important this is, right? And, well, yeah, but this keeps happening. The comic irony in this verse is this: what the greedy person does with his eyes is what happens to the object of his affection. Just as fast as he sees a chance to get rich, he gets to watch what he wants fly away. Now, here's a proverb for those who are desiring to get their hands on the family wealth before the proper time. If one curses his father or mother, his lamp will be put out in the thickest darkness. An inheritance quickly gained at the beginning will not be blessed at the end. Now, to honor your parents was a high value for the Hebrew family, and it used to be practiced among most of our families in the past. That is a dying priority. And beyond the actual use of any nasty words, the cursing of our parents is a sign of ingratitude and disrespect. The one who looks for the downfall or embarrassment of his parents is reminded that such a vile desire will come back on the one doing the cursing. The snuffing out of his lamp is an image for premature death. Now, why the child is cursing his parents is not explained here. But those who dishonor their parents are tempted to get what is coming to them at their parents' expense. So they curse because they didn't get what they believe is owed to them. Whatever that might be, at whatever age the child shows such contempt. Think about this. Murder mysteries often have their basis in what is revealed in these couple of verses. It begins with dishonoring my parents by believing that they're holding out on me for something that's coming to me. So if my dad runs the family business and I want it, or I think he's too old and doesn't know how things really need to work today, then my disrespect grows. And verse 21 allows for the possibility that I will find a way to reduce my parents' influence or oversight to the point that I will be willing to have something to do with their deaths so that I gain the family treasure. Now, with that in mind, this proverb warns us that an inheritance quickly gained is not a sign of God's blessing. It may be in the indication of something more sinister. Such a means of obtaining this kind of windfall by pushing my parents out of the way will not allow me to enjoy the blessings of such wealth for very long, especially when someone gets suspicious of my new fortune and the legal authorities begin investigating. Now, I assume that most of us would find that particular application of this verse just absolutely vile and appalling. Yet a more realistic application of this verse would come to those of us who have the power of attorney or serve as an executor of an estate. To honor God, one who is entrusted to manage an inheritance or a settlement or a disbursement of our parents' funds means that we have to exercise integrity, not to take advantage of the wealth that we have at our disposal. As you look through Proverbs concerning the need to have things or the hunger for riches, you will find some unusual combinations of things connected to wealth as well, along with the unintended consequences of those desires. So here's one of them. Having perverse or lying lips. Better a poor man whose walk is blameless than a fool whose lips are perverse. Now, the contrast points to the inner character of a person in relationship to wealth. The one who doesn't have much but honors God is better off morally, both in this life and, more importantly, in the eyes of God. While it is painful not to have some basic things in this world, the blameless person has a clear conscience to carry with him. But the one who has a hunger for things which are out of control will lie, twist, and use his words to manipulate others to get what he or she wants. Beyond the headache of keeping all your lies straight, the level of stress and the need to keep controlling everything so you can obtain what you desire don't usually add up to making you a very pleasant person to be around. And once any of the lies or full story come to light, then the greedy person has the relationship fallout to deal with. You lied to me. Going to the next verse, we find that the desire for something without wisdom to obtain it properly leads to hasty choices that do not bring the expected reward, missing the way. It is not good to have zeal without knowledge, and he who hurries his footsteps misses the way. He who hurries is a phrase found in Proverbs which identifies a person that acts quickly without regard to moral consequences, especially in order to obtain some valuables. It's one of many descriptions that wisdom literature calls a fool. My word for the same person is a bumblebee. It came from years ago when our former pastor, Mark, and I were talking about the teenage boys in our Christian academy. In one conversation, we shared a common confusion and frustration as to what would possess these young men to make such foolish choices in their relationships, in spending their money and their free time, and in scheduling the activities they scheduled. Mark simply just said, he's just a bumblebee. Now, he got the term from a friend who used it the same way that I do. Now, in real life, bumblebees are those fuzzy black and yellow creatures that drop out of the sky and land on a flower to collect pollen. They do make honey, and they do have a queen, but they're different from honeybees. The male bumblebee is affectionately known as the drone. He only works during the day, never at night. His job is simply to serve the queen, but he may not really know that, because when the colony has done its job for the season, the fertilized females who will become queens the following summer get to fly off in search of a safe place to hibernate for the winter, while the male bumblebees are left to die. As you think about it, there may be some crossover between the characteristics of the insect and the persons that I'm describing. But regardless of its origins, I now use the term bumblebee almost religiously to describe a person that makes choices without thinking or asking. Choices that are actually inconsistent with his own long-term goals. He short-circuits his own plan. Choices that are out of step with common sense, or those that will clearly create more problems down the line. It's important to know that in the Bible, to be a fool is not usually an issue of intelligence, although it can be. It's about willful ignorance. In a moment of decision, emotion, or desperation, the fool acts first and thinks about it later, if at all. It is not good to have zeal without knowledge, and he who hurries his footstep misses the way. In his ignorance, the bumblebee is running to obtain something that he or she considers very valuable, but misses what is truly valuable in this life and the priorities that God has called him to. Here's the next verse. The foolishness of a man ruins his life, yet his heart rages against the Lord. Now, when you think about it, the one who seeks after wealth as a primary goal in life, or security, because wealth and security go together, has elevated himself to the position of ruler of the universe. Think about this. He believes that his desires are both right and that he has a right to obtain them. Since the fool believes that he must get all he can in this world, he ends up living a life of frustration and even anger when his desires are not fulfilled. So when God somehow reveals himself as the one who is truly sovereign over all things, the greedy, impatient, manipulative liar curses God. How could you let my stuff get stolen or lost or damaged? Who are you to stop me from getting what I want? Such anger, impatience, and arrogance is connected to the desire to gain what is not yours, and that leads to other problems as well. A greedy person stirs up dissension, but the one who trusts in the Lord will be enriched. Now, greed is a word that means wide or large. Now, this is not a reference to the size of your waist after too many Christmas cookies, but to a desire or an appetite of a different kind. In fact, some translations use the word arrogant or proud. The immediate context is all about riches and poverty and the attitudes associated with each. So listen to the larger context. He who works his land will have an abundance of food, but the one who chases fantasies will have his fill of poverty. A faithful man will be richly blessed, but one eager to get rich will not go unpunished. To show partiality is not good. Yet a man will do wrong for a piece of bread. A stingy man is eager to get rich and is unaware that poverty awaits him. He who rebukes a man will in the end gain more favor than he who has a flattering tongue. He who robs his father or mother and says, "It's not wrong," he is a partner to him who destroys. A greedy man stirs up dissension, but he who trusts in the Lord will prosper. He who trusts in himself is a fool, but he who walks in wisdom is kept safe. He who gives to the poor will lack nothing, but he who closes his eyes to them receives many curses. The hunger for riches or stuff is so strong among people that it propels the one with the large appetite into conflict with other people. The greedy are focused on what they want, and so people or even legal boundaries are simply obstacles that have to be climbed over. And because the one who is discontent does not count on God to ultimately provide, he moves ahead with his own plan, willing to disrupt and destroy people or relationships in order to obtain what he seeks. The one who steals crosses a line that creates conflict with law enforcement and harms the community. The one who uses another person to get something plays with relationships as if they are chess pieces. Yet those who rely on God and his ways do not count on wealth the same way as the greedy does. The one who trusts the Lord sees people as those who should be blessed, not used, manipulated, or taken advantage of. The one who counts on Christ for his well-being is not willing to cross a moral or legal line to be better off. It really comes down to what you believe about wealth, its purpose, its long-term value, and how you determine what's truly valuable. Both the Old and New Testament speak of earthly things of value, such as silver and gold and precious stones. But we can misunderstand wealth or treasure if we have not studied correctly. For example, this is a common way of thinking among church-going people when it comes to our ideas of wealth or treasure. So in the Old Testament, the riches were a sign of God's blessing, gained for faithful obedience. They're to be enjoyed now, and they're physical in nature. While New Testament riches are a sign of God's blessing, gained for faithful obedience, and are to be enjoyed in eternity. They are spiritual in nature. Well, these are true summaries, but they are not mutually exclusive. And they're not the whole picture in either the Old or the New Testaments. You see, the Old Testament had more than its share of treasures and riches that were not for the moment, and they were not obtained on earth. Abraham walked through but did not gain the promised land with all its wealth and valuables. Neither did Moses. Nor did any of the Old Testament heroes see the day when the promised one would arrive. The Messiah was the long-awaited person who was to bring healing, rewards, and everlasting life. But those riches would not be seen until future generation at the first Christmas. And the New Testament had more than its share of treasures that were very real and very physical. Jesus was supported in his ministry by disciples who had the money to provide for him as he traveled all over Judea. Several wealthy women are identified specifically in the New Testament. A man named Joseph of Arimathea let Jesus be buried in the tomb that Joseph owned as a wealthy man. And as the church was forming, those who had wealth were free to sell that so that they would provide help to other believers who did not have much. Both testaments speak of valuables and values that are beyond this earth and will not be available until Jesus hands them out as rewards to those who belong to him. And both testaments also speak of valuables beyond silver and gold, which can be experienced while living on this earth. Of course, it's an issue of faith. Those who believe that this life is all there is are forced to chase after all they can get because they only have about 80 years to do it if they're fortunate to live that long. And then they don't have anything forever. Those who believe there's an eternity waiting, that Jesus really is Lord, and that he really does have full oversight of everything that happens here, including a person's financial situation. That person can see the riches of this life for what they are. And the physical and material ones are to be enjoyed and shared with the people they care about now, and not chased after as the highest goal of life when they're missing from life. There are other things that are valuable which cannot be deposited in a safe, and they have greater value than all the oil and gold on the planet. The satisfaction of a job well done is a reward that we obtain here. The contentment that comes from obeying God, even when there's a price to pay, as others mock or don't understand your devotion to him. The joy of knowing I'm forgiven because what of Jesus did on the cross for me. That's a present reality for those who have confessed their sin and have surrendered their current and future lives to him. The ability to see someone understand the Word of God, that aha moment, and embrace it, and to see somebody grow in the faith. Then there is a good name, which is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. When we move to the New Testament, the topic of wealth or treasure is even more deeply defined and tied together under the larger heading of stewardship. The raw materials to produce things that others will buy from you are a gift. The hands that you have, which allow you to make something or provide a service to somebody else, are a gift. The mind that you have to be creative or produce something of value or decide where to invest your treasures, that's a gift. The breath that you took for granted over the last 60 seconds is a gift. And the toys and the gadgets and the homes and the cars are also gifts, which God has offered to us as his managers. All these resources are ours to use, but they don't ultimately belong to us. Therefore, when it comes to the subject of the wealth or poverty, the paradox concerning both riches and poverty must be kept clear in our own thinking. So let me help you out with that. The poor may be poor due to character flaws and the consequence of foolish or wicked choices. The poor may be poor because God has removed from them their possessions, so that they may no longer depend on the material things in which they once trusted, but place their trust in the one who gives those things instead. On the other hand, the poor may be poor through no direct fault of his own. This earth is not heaven. They may even be poor because they refuse to gain wealth by wicked means, and so they're suffering the consequences for their integrity and God-honoring choices. Then we have the rich. The rich may be wealthy due to character flaws. They've deceived, they've stolen, they've manipulated and damaged people and property to get what they want. The rich may have received a windfall, like an inheritance, but God's using it to test the depth of their character and stewardship priorities. The rich may be well off because God has blessed them for their hard work, their wise choices, and the diligence in their effort. And now they have the freedom to use that treasure to bless others and enjoy the fruits of their labor among family and friends. But whether having or lacking wealth, those who treasure what God does remain strong in their dependence on him. So they will not compromise Scripture or godliness for something that has temporary value. You know, with all the seasonal focus on spending money and buying presents, gifts that probably will be forgotten 2 years from now, I find it curious that this is the exact same time of year when the story is told over and over again in many versions of one man who came to understand that his great wealth actually made him poor. Ebenezer Scrooge allowed his heart to be changed so that he might begin to invest in what is truly valuable, those who are made in the image of God. So I recommend you take time to go back through Proverbs if you get time off during Christmas or as we start the new year. In doing so, you will not find it surprising that Proverbs identifies the highest treasure of this world as gaining wisdom. Because wisdom is to know the mind of God and be able to use it. Blessed is the one who finds wisdom and the one who gets understanding. For the gain from her, meaning wisdom, is better than gain from silver, and her profit better than gold. She's more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire can compare with her. What is valuable and precious is really tied to our attitudes and beliefs concerning who really owns them all and where those treasures intersect our current lives. So as we move through the season of gifts and money and considering what is worthwhile, I leave you with this prayer from the Book of Wisdom. 2 things I ask of you, Lord. Do not refuse me before I die. Keep falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but feed me with the food that is needed. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, "Who's the Lord?" Or I may become poor and steal, and so dishonor the name of my God. Father, let us pray that prayer today and protect us as we go full force in the next couple of weeks before Christmas Day, as we have different traditions and expectations, celebrations, or just spending time home alone. And I pray that you would allow us to keep that balance between what is truly important and valuable and that which is not. Help us in our finances as a church and as individuals. Thank you for those who are generous and continue to give so that we continue our ministries. And I pray that you would give hearts that are increasingly generous as we go into a new year, knowing that money is even tighter, but that it's still your money nonetheless. Father, grant us wisdom and grace as we go about our business, as we try to earn another dollar, as we try to use it wisely. In Jesus' name, amen.
Please stand.